ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this evening's quarterfinals debate. My name is Amber and I am the chairman of this debate. This debate will be judged by a panel of 3 adjudicators who are Miss Nair, Mr. Barnett and Miss Wood. The topic for this debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Adelaide High School, and the negative team seated to my left is from Pulteney. The speaking time of this debate is 5 minutes. A single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched off. I declare that this debate open and call on the first affirmative speaker, Rebecca Loxton.
Good evening, Madam Chairperson, timekeeper and spectators. The topic for this debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. We as the affirmative team believe that this statement is true. We define the topic's key words as parents, someone who raises a child as their legal guardian and or parents, stated by the Cambridge Dictionary. Repeatedly meaning to do over and over again, or constantly, defined by Oxford Languages. Additionally, we define repeatedly in the context of this debate means to be a chronic non-attender, which is defined by the South Australian Education and Attendance Policy as a student who is absent for 10 or more days per term, averaging to one day per week, without an approved reason for absence. Fail, to not succeed in what you are expected to do, defined by the Cambridge Dictionary. We define a child for this context of this debate as a child who is of compulsory school age, which is defined by the Education and Child Services Act of 2019 as a child who is at least 6 years old but is not yet 19 years of age. Finally, in the context of this debate, prosecution means to attend a court date and judgment and or penalty with a maximum fine of $5,000 in the case of conviction. All responsible parties can and will be prosecuted, whether it is the child or parent at fault. As the first speaker of the affirmative team, I will be discussing how this affects the student's future, not only leaving them less capable of social skills and not allowing them for them to receive a proper education. My second point will highlight how prosecution will not be an unexpected outcome. Our second speaker will discuss how parents have a duty of care and legal obligation to ensure their child is receiving an education. He will also talk about the effectiveness of fines and prosecution and how it is able to alter habits such as these. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up the affirmative team case. My first point is that consistent absence from school can affect a child's development and future prospects. When parents continuously fail to send their kids to school, the kids will ultimately miss out on experiences like essential learning and socialization. As the UNICEF website mentions, without quality education, children face considerable barriers to employment and earning potential later in life. They are more likely to suffer from adverse health outcomes and less likely to participate in decisions that affect them, threatening their ability to shape a better future for themselves and their societies. The world is in a learning crisis right now. Disallowing your child to attend school results in them missing out on vital skills. The South Australian Government agrees with this statement, mentioning in a report from 2018 to 2021 that while poor attendance is a strong indicator of lower levels of achievement in learning tasks, it also highlights the potential for problematic social skills and difficulty in forming and maintaining relationships. Acquiring social skills is mandatory for mental health, with studies by the National Centre for Biotechnology Information presenting how social skills are learned behaviours learned from people around them. Limiting the people that they interact with ultimately affects mental health, leading to the child feeling things such as loneliness and stress, which can both leave a negative effect. This overall concludes the fact that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. Secondly, that prosecution will not be an unexpected outcome. There is a major process that is outlined by the EDI, which consists of 4 steps prior to prosecution. First, the partial care teacher will contact their family. Then a sub-leader becomes involved and holds a meeting with the household before SWIS is contacted. SWIS stands for Social Work in Schools, which provides support to all school communities. This process is followed gradually if previous steps fail to display a difference. Only after all these processes and no sufficient results will prosecution occur with the family's knowledge. Prior to this case being accepted, it must be approved by the Education Minister before proceeding to court. Education SA provides an understanding of a parent's legal responsibilities, which is that your child must attend school every day that it is open, unless there is an explanation, for example, being sick. It is the parent's legal responsibility. Not sending your child to school is neglect. As mentioned in the child protection curriculum, neglect is considered a form of abuse. This furthermore concludes that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. So, Madam Chairperson, Timekeeper and spectators, we as the affirmative team staunchly believe that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. This removes the students' ability to improve social skills, along with preventing them from a basic human right, which is the right to education. Schools provide safe teachings that are vital for valuable skills for their futures. Why stop them from achieving that? Thank you.
I call upon the first negative speaker, Jeffrey Wayne.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. We, as the negative team, believe this statement to undoubtedly be false. We agree with the definition given by the affirmative team. Before I begin with my points, I would like to rebut the points made by the first affirmative speaker. She said that there would be adverse effects for not attending school regularly. There are many reasons why children might not be at school, including family mental health or poverty issues. Not every non-attender's parents are at fault here. She also talked about how the outcome of prosecution in this instance should already happen. However, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are debating about whether the idea of prosecution is a good idea or not, instead of simply stating that this outcome would happen under legislation. Today, my team will present 4 strong points. First, I will be speaking about how current legislation, along with the Education Minister's intentions, prove that the topic does not define any parent. I will also briefly mention how schools and parents have an equal need to ensure children go to school. My second speaker will speak about how the government should focus on meeting its own standards rather than pinning the blame on parents, and that there are many better ways to improve truancy. My third speaker will provide a rebuttal and a summary of our team's case. First, I would like to talk about the related legislation of this topic itself. In Australian law, there is already the Education and Children's Services Act of 2019 and the associated Education and Children's Services Regulations of 2020, which define how truancy is treated. The legislation states that parents have a responsibility under the Education and Children's Services Act to ensure that their children attend school regularly. If a child or a young person does not attend without a prescribed reason for their non-attendance or an approved exemption, their parents may be guilty of an offence. In fact, the legislation defines these children as chronic non-attenders, which is if they're away 10 days or more without an acceptable explanation. This means that the legislation will obviously not find children who are being homeschooled, on holiday, or are absent due to illness, guilty under the Act. I would also briefly like to mention that the legislation states that education directors need to ensure attendance improvement is implemented consistently across their partnership as part of the preschool and school improvement planning cycle. This shows that school and parents have an equal need to ensure children are sent to school. If this is true, Why are only parents being prosecuted under this new implementation instead of working for both parties to improve their standard? Continuing on, the legislation states that only parents who have not given sufficient notice when the child is away 10 days or more can be charged under the Act. However, the Education Minister, in an Advertiser article, clearly stated his intentions that families struggling with mental illness, family violence, or poverty will also not be pursued. He even went as far to say, and I quote, "A large fine will compound these issues." Now, I want to ask the affirmative team, if this is true, then what parents will actually be prosecuted under this law? Those with adequate notice will not be persecuted under the Education and Children's Services Act, as I've just stated. And those without adequate notice will not be persecuted under the Education Minister's own words. What other kind of average parent would not be willing to send their children to school? Therefore, due to this, it is clear that the sudden application of these acts would be completely useless. In the case of just plain laziness, I doubt that parents would come up with the reason of, "I'm too lazy." Instead, they would come up with an acceptable excuse, meaning, again, the government has no ability to persecute these parents. It is simply a big ruse for the government to act as if they will do something when they won't be doing anything at all, further proving the utter uselessness of this implementation. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, it is clear that the proposed applications of the stated acts before are completely useless, as no parents will actually be prosecuted under this law. In addition, it is both parents' and schools' responsibility to make sure children are sent to school properly. Why are we placing resources on enforcing pointless, fruitless, and impractical legislation? Thank you, and good night.
Call upon the second affirmative speaker, Morris Thomas England.
Good evening, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. We, the affirmative team, will comprehensively demonstrate that this statement is true. The first speaker of the negative team has tried to tell you that punishments are not equally distributed. This is wrong because any irresponsible parties can and will be prosecuted, as we mentioned in our definition. Our first speaker spoke to you about how consistently being absent from school affects a child's development and future prospects. She also said that prosecution will not be an unexpected outcome and measures will be taken beforehand. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. Today, I'll be speaking to you about 2 points. My first point is that parents have a duty of care for making sure that their children receive an education. Parents have a duty of care that makes sure that children attend school every day. This is for the safety, welfare and protection of each and every child and is to ensure that all children receive a proper education. Family law recognised by the Australian Government defines that the duty of care that parents have in relation to bringing up their children includes 6 fundamental things, one of which being to provide them with an education. If this basic responsibility is not carried out by a parent or caregiver, isn't it right to suggest that they should be held accountable? Not to mention, education is one of the 7 universal human rights, and according to the Australian Government's Attorney General Department, it is included in Article 13 of International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. According to Sewin and Kettle's Legal Dictionary, common categories of legal relationships afford an automatic duty of care. A parent-child relationship is recognised as having an automatic. A person who breaches a duty of care owed to another can be found to be neglect. So a fine is a small price to pay, don't you think? A duty of care is not an abstract concept. It is a legal obligation that is imposed on an individual requiring adherence to standards of reasonable care. To not observe a duty of care can be perceived as an act of neglect. Our society has deemed providing a child with an education carries a legal duty of care. My second point is that fines and prosecution actually make a difference. A study conducted by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania demonstrated that people who have experiences with larger fines have an accelerated level of compliance compared to people who have had experiences with smaller fines. They also detailed that people who have experiences with late fees on their fines have a significantly decreased likelihood to re-offend. Additionally, a Crime and Justice Bulletin published by the New South Wales Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research says that fines are a flexible penalty and can be adjusted to reflect both the severity of the crime and the offender's financial circumstances. In doing so, they provide an effective sanction for retribution by one which does not place an unjust burden on the offender. Monetary value does not have to be gained as long as the recipients of the fine attend a court date and a difference is seen in behaviour and the judge rules that the monetary fine does not need to be paid. Furthermore, Blair Boyer, the South Australian Education Minister, said in an interview on NCA News Wireless that enforcing fines is not to target families who are struggling, but to punish those who are actively stopping their children from attending schools. In conclusion, we, the affirmative team, indisputably believe that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. Thank you.
I call upon the second negative speaker, Ethan Davis.
Nelson Mandela once said, "There can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than in the way in which it treats its children." Ladies and gentlemen, Chairman, good evening. Did you notice that Mr. Mandela said a society's soul rather than a parent's soul? He knew that a community as a whole is responsible for a child's development. If something is going wrong in their lives, we all have to take responsibility. This is why we think tonight that the government should not prosecute parents who repeatedly fail to explain their children's absences from school for more than 10 days in a term. We as the negative team, of course, strongly disagree with this law. The second speaker for the affirmative has tried to say that fines will convince parents to send their children back to school. However, how will parents pay fines if they do not have any money? The answer is a payment arrangement system, where you can pay money every week, fortnight or month. And this might amount to $10 a week, which is clearly not enough to deter parents, as that money can easily be made and they can continue neglecting their children. They have also tried to say that parents are responsible for their children's absences. While this is true, they are not the only ones responsible. And as I will explain later, the government also has responsibility over their children. However, as we will see later, they are clearly failing at their duties by assigning over 8,000 students to one truancy officer, who is a person who tries to increase attendance rates in schools. Tonight, our first speaker has shown you that Education Minister Mr. Boyer has publicly ruled out prosecuting parents of families where mental health issues, family violence, or poverty play a role, and also how it could be difficult to prove that parents were actually actively preventing children from attending school. Additionally, he mentioned that legislation states that parents can only be prosecuted if students have unexplained absences for 10 or more days, and that both the school and parents have equal responsibility to communicate with each other, thereby showing that there are very few parents who can actually be prosecuted. Now I'm going to talk about 2 points. My first point is about how the government needs to make sure it's meeting its own responsibilities and that its systems are working flawlessly rather than scapegoating parents for non-attendance. In an article from the Advertiser from August 26th of this year, Child Protection Minister Katrine Hildyard said that she was absolutely concerned about chronic absenteeism and said agencies must be connected so that when a particular alarm bell rings, the system acts and intervenes as it should. With this statement, Minister Hildyard implies that the systems are not working as they should and could contribute to the continued unexplained absences. The government needs to get its own house in order before prosecuting parents. According to the same article, the government currently employs 34 school truancy officers who are tasked with trying to engage parents and offer solutions to get children back to the classroom or to online learning. However, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, there are 274,252 students enrolled in South Australian schools. This equates to one truancy officer per 8,068 students. Surely this is not enough. How can effective intervention possibly occur when one truancy officer is assigned over 8,000 students? The government must actually invest money into its own strategies in order to work with families and schools to combat this problem, rather than looking to place the entire blame on parents. Now to my second point. There are 2 main reasons why we must look beyond simply issuing a fine to parents to solve chronic unexplained absenteeism. One is that as we previously mentioned, the Minister of Education has ruled out prosecuting a large majority of parents of children who miss more than 10 days unexplained per term. And the other is that we have a collective responsibility as a society for the well-being of our children. Schools and communities need to work together to develop an approach that provides universal, targeted and intensive interventions that meet the needs of students, families and schools. Concrete measures which could add additional incentive for schools to work with families could be adding attendance rate levels to annual school reviews and giving school leadership powers to enable them to insist on meetings between families of absent children and welfare authorities. Chairperson, parents and guests, I'm sure that it is now clear as day that schools need to build strong connections to families to understand the challenges parents face getting their children to school, and that through funding and support and not by chasing parents through the courts. This is the only way forward if we as a society want to have any hope of protecting our most vulnerable children from the quite severe impact that chronic absenteeism can have on their lives. Thank you for listening.
third affirmative speaker, Naisha Suba.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. We, the affirmative team, strongly agree with this statement. The first speaker has tried to tell you that no parents will be prosecuted under this law. This is incorrect because, unlike they said, not all absences are grouped into being ill, going on vacation, etc. There are alternate reasons as well. The first negative speaker has also attempted to say that there is no issue about the absences as they are all categorized. Most Australians attend school regularly, with 75% of year 1 to 10 students attending at least 90% of school days in 2018. However, if you take a closer look at this data, it indicates something concerning. If 75% of students at school attend at least 90% of the time, then the reverse suggests that 25%, 1 in 4 Australian students were absent for more than 10% of school time, 20 or more days. These students are missing at least a month of school over the schooling year. This method clearly isn't working. Additionally, as our second speaker stated, fines have been proven to work. A study conducted by a researcher at University of Pennsylvania mentions how significantly less likely it is for people to commit crimes again after experiencing fines. The second speaker has tried to say that it is not only the parents' responsibility to send their children to school. To bring forth a being into this world who has no idea of what life entails should be responsibility as a parent to ensure that the appropriate necessities of life are provided for that child. Every child deserves the best shot at quality education. Depriving a child of that is like depriving the universe of another great, outstanding being, spreading knowledge through his or her intellect. The second speaker has also tried to tell you that truancy officers do not work. However, this debate, we are not talking about truancy officers. We're talking about the prosecution of irresponsible parents. Additionally, not all students are truancies. You can't just say that every student has chronic absence. The second negative speaker said that it is a communal responsibility to ensure that children should attend school regularly. He backed this up with a Nelson Mandela quote, of which is not a legal statement. However, the Australian Education and Attendance Policy states is a legal document and states that parents do in fact have the sole legal obligation to ensure their child's regular attendance. Our first speaker talked to you about how a child's growth and chances for the future can also be impacted by persistent absences from school. She also said parents should be aware that prosecution may ensue. Our second speaker spoke to you about how it is a parent's duty of care, making sure that students acquire an education. His final point was that actual change is brought about by fines and prosecution. In conclusion, we, the affirmative team, strongly believe that parents should be prosecuted if they fail to send their children to school.
on the third negative speaker, Charlie Griffin.
Good evening, Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should be prosecuted. Over the last 30 minutes, our team has presented several arguments showing that we utterly disagree with the topic. Before I begin my rebuttal, I would like to make some things clear. The Education Minister has not said anything about changing any legislation surrounding the issue at this stage. As Mr. Boyer stated in the Advertiser, he would test whether current laws strike the right balance before considering any change which would require approval from Parliament. Jeffrey, our first speaker, has showed you that the Education Minister has already outlined types of parents that he does not intend to prosecute, including when families were struggling with issues like mental illness, family violence or poverty, and even went as far as to say a large fine would compound those problems. He's merely described certain parents as selfish without giving any concrete details or examples. In reality, as Jeffrey has said, this is a ruse to make the government look like it is acting tough without doing anything substantial. I will now address the theme of morals as presented by the affirmative team. The basis of this argument is that parents who are at fault for their lack of their children's education. However, this fact ignores the other fact that many parents are simply unable to send their kids off to school. There are many reasons for this, such as mental health issues, poverty, or school rejection. However, it seems like the Minister of Education doesn't intend to prosecute these parents, as I've just said. Only the ones without an excuse, the lazy ones. And for that, the morals of these parents does come into question. But this debate isn't about whether sending kids to school is a good thing. It's about their prosecution. The affirmative first speaker said that parents not sending their kids to school is negligence. This debate is about whether certain parents who don't send children to school should be prosecuted. Child negligence from the Crimes Act of 1900 is a whole other crime with a very broad definition. It is up to a court to find whether truancy is negligence. Their second speaker has said that fines will force them to send their kids to school, but that they can be modified to lessen their financial burden for lower income households. This, along with potentially the involvement of a payment arrangement plan, effectively nullifies the punishment in many circumstances, as our second speaker has said. The second have also said that any responsible parties will be prosecuted, including mental health or family violence. But as the Education Minister has said, they will not be and shouldn't be. Their failure to send their children to school in these cases isn't necessarily their fault. Now, their third speaker has said that our second speaker using a quote at the start of their speech is illegal. To the best of our knowledge, we find this to be false. Now, for some summary, our first speaker, Jeffrey, has discussed the existing legislation and mentioned the lack of action on the part of education directors and schools. The Education and Children's Services Act of 2019 clearly states that both parents and schools need to improve attendance in cases where this is problematic. However, only parents seem to be being prosecuted for their truancy. He has also talked about the many exceptions to the current legislature that shows that there is hardly a target demographic of parents to prosecute. The only group that could be prosecuted are parents who are too lazy, many of which are likely to find an excuse for it rather than admitting to a crime. Therefore, these actions by the government exist only as a ruse because there isn't a lot that can be done. Our second speaker, Ethan, has discussed that the government should focus on meeting its own standards rather than pinning the blame on parents. For example, the state government employs only 34 truancy officers tasked with getting chronic non-attenders, as the legislation defines, back in the classroom. 34, one for every 8,000 students in the state, as Ethan has stated. The government should work on employing more people tasked with the issue of truancy and committing more actions rather than prosecuting parents. He has also spoke about the many ways that truancy can be improved without prosecution or massive fines. For example, chronic absenteeism data could become a part of compulsory school reviews, or better yet, legislation could be passed to require meetings between state welfare officers and the parents of children who are absent, rather than jumping straight to prosecution. There are many ways to solve this problem besides fines. Now, at last, to come to a conclusion, we, the negative team, passionately and sincerely believe that parents who repeatedly fail to send their children to school should not be prosecuted. Thank you very much.
While the adjudicators finalize the results, I will read this evening's chairman notices. We are delighted to announce that the grand finals will be held in the House of Assembly Chamber, Parliament House, on Saturday 24th September 2022. Topic and side information for the semi-finals will be available on the debating essay website for tomorrow morning. Please be sure to check your side and debate time information carefully. Debates will be held here at the same venue next week. I invite a representative of the adjudication panel to come forward to announce the result.
Congratulations on both teams on making it to the quarterfinals and for such an entertaining debate. As each of the three adjudicators this evening we all arrived at our decisions independently, there is regrettably no individual speaker feedback for tonight. Moving on to today's decision, it was in fact split 2-1. However, in this instance, it was awarded to the negative team. Congratulations. And the Speaker of the Night award goes to Ethan Davis for overall excellence in debating.
I call upon a member of the runner-up team to give a vote of thanks.
I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and supporting us, especially since this is finals. I also want to thank parents, dropping us off and everything. Nazareth for hosting us, and to the adjudicators because we wouldn't really be able to have a debate without you guys, and to the timekeeping, and to Adelaide.
I call upon a member of the winning team to second that vote of thanks.
We, the negative team, would like to thank everyone here tonight, the adjudicators, chairperson, timekeepers and parents, but especially the negative team. Thank you for putting up such a great debate.